Okay, good evening, everybody. Last week we didn't have a shir, but today it's Halacha and Tanya. So today in Halacha we're going to learn in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch the dinim that are called Hilchos Maicholas Asuris, the general laws of forbidden foods, foods that are forbidden. So in Kitzur it says like this: blood. There's a mitzvah in the Torah. You're not allowed to eat blood. In fact, the Torah says, you have to strengthen yourself not to eat blood in any way whatsoever. So the din is, many times in eggs, you have blood spots. In Yiddish, it's called a blutstrap, a blood spot. So when you have a blood spot in an egg, you're not allowed to eat the blood spot. That's a given. Many times, the entire egg becomes forbidden. And the difference in din is like this. Therefore, anytime you make food, like you're cracking open eggs for fried eggs or omelet or cakes or whatever, in the Yiddish minig is to always check the eggs and make sure there's no blood spot in the egg. Now, there's two types of eggs, basically. Years ago, most of the eggs were what's called fertile eggs, meaning it was from a male and a female, and the chicken laid the egg, and that egg, when it hatched, would create another chick, and that's the way, unless if they ate the eggs. But usually, they laid eggs in a chicken farm to grow more chickens or roosters. Now, therefore, when there's a blood spot in an egg that comes from a male and female, it's called sterile eggs. So then, fertile eggs. So then we're afraid that this already might be beginning of a chick. And therefore the entire egg would be forbidden. Most eggs today are not fertile eggs. The white eggs, the simple white eggs that you buy in the store, basically are not fertile eggs. They're not coming from male and female. The chickens are injected with a hormone, whatever it is, and they lay eggs. Nevertheless, the custom is that the whole egg is forbidden. In other words, when you find a blood spot in an egg, you throw out the entire egg. But technically, the halacha is that really in those types of eggs, only the blood spot is really forbidden to eat. The minig is throughout all generations that would throw out the entire egg. But for instance, you have brown eggs or organic eggs or free-range eggs, whatever they call them. Those eggs have a tremendous percentage of blood spots. Tremendous percentage of blood spots. And therefore, those eggs, b'chlal, are not a good thing to buy unless you're interested in throwing out literally a half a dozen of a dozen. Many people end up throwing out a half a dozen eggs because they all have blood spots in them, which is a halachic issue. You can't eat the egg. So therefore, it's like this. Now, in the raw egg, the blood spot is on the yellow. When the egg becomes on the yolk, right, the yellow, which is the yolk. When you cook the egg and it becomes hard-boiled egg, so then the blood spot goes on to the white, into the egg white. And therefore, if you're checking, let's say, a hard-boiled egg, you can't look on the yolk of the egg. You have to look on the white part of the egg. If you're checking a blood spot on a raw egg, so then you need to check primarily the yolk of the egg and make sure there's no blood spot in it. So the old Yiddish minig, and this is the way it's supposed to be done, and therefore there's a whole question in halacha: can you trust kids checking for blood spots? Can you have your housekeeper who's not Jewish? Are they allowed to check for eggs? And it's a very complicated issue in halacha, and ideally, no. Little kids should not be checking for blood. People that are not Jewish, they're not particular and kashrus, so therefore they also shouldn't be checking for blood spots. Some people want to be lenient because most of the white eggs today don't have a blood spot, so therefore you can assume that it probably doesn't have, but that's not the proper way of checking eggs. An adult, boy or girl, and older from bar and bas mitzvah should be the ones checking the eggs. Now, the shaila in halacha is like this: do you need to check a hard-boiled egg? In other words, when you have a hard-boiled egg, are you actually obligated to cut it open and then open the inside of the white and check if there is a blood spot in the egg or not? So most poskim write you don't have to check a hard-boiled egg. In fact, it's known, we saw this ourselves, there was every so often by a Lag Ba'omer Farbrengen, the Rebbe would eat a hard-boiled egg at the Farbrengen of Lag Ba'omer, or Pesach at the Seder. You know, the custom is to eat the egg at the beginning of the meal. As everybody saw, the Rebbe cracked the egg open and the Rebbe bit into the egg and he didn't check the hard-boiled egg. That's the fact that the Rebbe didn't cut open the egg and check to see if there's a blood spot. So therefore, most poskim say hard-boiled eggs, al pidin, according to halacha, you don't need to check. But the regular eggs, raw eggs that you're cracking open, whether it's, again, for an omelet, fried egg, cakes, or whatever it is, halachically, you really should check the eggs, and they're going back and forth, and make sure there is no blood. Now, what happens if you let's say, you're cracking eggs, and all of a sudden, your fifth egg that you're cracking open falls into the other four eggs, and then you notice a blood spot. So then the din is, you just take out the blood spot. Because again, our eggs are not fertile, and therefore it's not a shaila on the whole egg really, even though the custom is to dispose of the whole egg. But nevertheless, the blood spot that you take out, that's actually what's forbidden, and therefore you need to take it out. Okay, next.
Sorry, Rabbi, we have to boil 3 at a time at least.
The reason why the custom is to boil 3 eggs, and years ago, people had separate egg pots. I mean, there are people today that have that also, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Many years ago, in the old Yiddish minhag in the Jewish houses, they had, in fact, many people would use a can that they would be able to throw out. What would be the issue why you cook 3 eggs? Because if one of the eggs had a blood spot, then the other 2 nullify the 2, it's batel b'rov in that case. So the 2 nullify the 1. So therefore there's no shaila on the pot. And the other 2 eggs would be forbidden, would be kosher also. That's the minhag why people had a separate egg pot in case there was a blood spot. And again, in those days there were fertile eggs, and it could be that the whole egg became forbidden, then you'd have to kasher the pot. Today, the minhag is they don't kasher the pots because, again, the poskim right, because most eggs today are not fertile. At least the normal white eggs that you buy in the store are not fertile, and therefore only the drop of blood, and you take out the blood, it's not a problem. Now, fish blood is allowed. You're allowed to eat fish blood, but it says in halacha like this: if somebody, don't ask me what it means, but they got blood out of a fish into a glass or a cup. So you have a whole cup full of blood, but it's really fish blood. So halachically, you're allowed to drink it. But you're not allowed to because people might think you're drinking regular blood or you're using regular blood. So it's, again, what's called madasayin. But if you can tell that it's fish, like you see scales in the blood, is what the poskim write. If you see scales in the blood, so then you know for sure it came from a fish. Now, what's with human blood? Human blood, and this people are not as careful to this, by the way. Human blood that comes out of the body is forbidden to eat. For instance, if you take an apple and you bite into the apple and your gums are bleeding or your teeth are bleeding, and now you bit into the apple, and now on the apple there's some blood. It came out of your mouth. That blood is not allowed to be eaten. You have to wash off the apple. You don't have to throw out the apple. You just have to wash off the blood that's in the apple. Because human blood, once it leaves the body, it's forbidden to eat. Blood that's in your mouth, that you could swallow because it never left you. It's also because of madasayin. but therefore human blood that comes out, you're not allowed to eat. Where am I saying people are not careful with this? Many times a person will cut his finger a little bit. And the tendency is to try to stop the bleeding with your tongue, because the tongue is wet. So you press the tongue on the wound and the little cut to stop the bleeding. The problem with that is you're actually eating blood. That blood that left the finger. Blood that left the finger, you're not allowed to eat. So you cannot lick blood off your finger, off an apple, off a fruit or a piece of cake or whatever, wherever the blood may be. The blood that's still in your mouth, that you're allowed to swallow, and there's no problem with it halachically either. Okay, that is that din. Okay, next. By the way, you find an interesting comment here they bring down at the bottom. What happens if you have a wine that the color of the wine is really mamish blood color? And they say that that's not a problem. Chacham didn't forbid things like it's wine. It looks like blood. That doesn't mean you can't drink tomato juice. To give an example today, you're allowed to drink tomato juice from a cup, and nobody's going to say, well, you're allowed to drink blood, and tomato juice looks like blood. So maybe somebody's going to be thinking that you're drinking tomato juice. That the Chachamim didn't go that far. In fact, they bring down many of the vegetation look like bugs. They look like little creepy things, and yet the Chacham did not forbid them. So therefore, that's not an issue. So you're allowed to drink tomato juice, but if you have a cup full of blood from a fish, unless if there's scales in the blood, you're not allowed to drink the blood. Okay, next thing is like this. Meat and milk. The Torah says, in fact, in today's parsha also, you're not allowed to cook a kid, meaning an animal, in its mother's milk. Now the Torah says 3 times in Torah. 3 times in Chumash that the Torah say you cannot cook a goat in its mother's milk. Therefore, the Chachamim learn out, which was given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. Why does the Torah say 3 times you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to cook milchiks and fleishiks together? It teaches us, there's other things that they derive from this also, but what is relevant to what we're learning now. Number 1, cooking meat and milk is forbidden. Just cooking it. Meat and milk is forbidden to cook. So if somebody is cooking meat and milk together, even if they're not planning to eat it, they're cooking it for a guy, or they're cooking it for whatever. You're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. Just cooking it is a negative commandment in the Torah. Secondly, the Torah says you're not allowed to cook, meaning you're not allowed to eat. The fact that the Torah says the same thing 3 times, you're not allowed to eat meat and milk together. And the 3rd time the Gemara learns out, teaches us, you're not allowed to benefit from meat and milk together. Which means, if you have something that was cooked, meat and milk together, and somebody gave it to you for a present, you're not allowed to give it to a non-Jew as a present. You can eat cheeseburgers, you can eat meat and milk. What's the issue? A Jew is not allowed to benefit from meat and milk together. Now, therefore, like this, you're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. And therefore, by the way, most of the culinary schools where you learn how to be a chef, unless if it's a frum school, it's almost impossible for a frum Jew to work there, to learn how to cook there. Why? Most recipes today have meat and milk in it. And if it has meat and milk in it, you're not allowed to cook it. That's number 1. Secondly, if you're learning in a culinary school where the food is not kosher, there's another issue. You might come to taste the food, which is another issue. You might come to taste the food. By you're cooking, people may forget and they'll taste the food, which is not kosher. But there's another issue, and that is what happens if somebody has an animal. They have a dog, a cat, whatever. Many dog foods or cat foods, if you look in the ingredients, have meat and milk in them together. You can have whey, which is a milk byproduct. You can have meat, obviously. You can have a lot of things in it, which has meat and milk together. Now, giving food to your dog, even though your dog's obviously not obligated in Torah mitzvahs, but nevertheless, you're benefiting from it if you give it to your dog. And therefore, it's biblically forbidden to benefit from meat and milk that is cooked together. But, and here's a big but, when the Torah says, "Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imay," you're not allowed to cook a goat in his mother's milk. Okay? That's why chicken, biblically, is not forbidden with milk. Because chicken doesn't have chalev imay. There's no mother's milk by a chicken. The Torah doesn't say, "Lo sevashel cholav im basar." The Torah says, "Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imay." You cannot cook a goat, in its mother's milk. That means an animal that has milk, that is the milk that's the meat that you cannot cook milk in. Therefore, biblically, chicken is not biblically forbidden for meat and milk. The Chachamim, later on in history, the Chachamim, it's questionable when that Isser came about, but later on in history, the Chachamim said, chicken is considered like a meat, it looks like a meat, or whatever. So the Chachamim said, you cannot eat chicken and milk also. But that already, because it's not biblical, it's not forbidden to cook, and it's not forbidden to benefit from. Therefore, if you have, let's say, dog food that has chicken and milk, you're not allowed to eat it, obviously, straight for chicken anyway. But that chicken, the dog food or cat food, is allowed to be given to your dog or cat because it's only rabbinically forbidden to eat. And the Chachamim did not forbid to cook it or to benefit from it. Another interesting halacha, the sin of cooking meat and milk together or benefiting from meat and milk together is only if it's a kosher animal, even though it's not slaughtered. That means as follows. If somebody mixes milk with pig, you're allowed to benefit from it, and it's not forbidden to cook it. But if it's beef, in other words, from a cow or whatever it is, meat from a kosher animal, if it's a goat meat or sheep meat or lamb meat or cow meat, whatever, then even though it's not shechted, it's still forbidden to cook it with meat, with milk, and forbidden to benefit from it. So therefore, in a very simple, practical way, it means like this. If you have dog food, and in the ingredients there's beef and milchiks, you're not allowed to give it to your dog because you're benefiting from it. And you're not allowed to cook it. And you're not, but if it's chicken and milk, or pig's meat, let's say pork and milk, so then you're not allowed to eat it, obviously, for two reasons. But it doesn't apply the din of no cooking and no benefiting from it. Okay? Now, there is a rule that if meat and milk gets, by the way, this din of cooking, meat and milk together, doesn't only mean cooking. It means roasting, frying, electric. In other words, if you have a crock pot that's electric, and you put milk and meat together in that pot, you transgress the sin of cooking meat and milk together, even if you're not eating it. which, by the way, to bring up another issue that many people are unaware of, so to speak. Many girls or boys end up becoming like the housekeepers for elderly couple. An elderly couple needs somebody to go shopping for them, to cook for them, to clean up for them. So many times Jewish boys or girls, whatever, want to get a job to get free room and board, and and these people either are goyim or they're non-religious Jews. That is a very, very big problem, because if you're going to be feeding this Jewish couple non-kosher food, or cooking it for them, or buying it for them, you are what's called B'sayei Lidei Aveda. You're helping them sin, and that would be forbidden, even if it's goyim. But if they want you to cook them meat and milk together, you're not allowed to, because you're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. Just cooking is forbidden. So people have to be aware that in these things, that there's a big issue with meat and milk and all that stuff. Another thing I want to mention also, there's a lot to talk about basar v'cholov. We're not going to spend months on it, but a few classes will probably spend on basic rules of meat and milk. You have to assume another rule, and this people should be aware of. Whatever you buy in a milchika restaurant, a dairy restaurant, you must assume is dairy. Anything you buy in a meat restaurant, you have to assume it's meat, unless if they're from it, the mashgiach tells you that everything was made completely separated. I'll give you an example. If you have French fries, you buy French fries from a fleishika restaurant. It's very possible, and it's done, by the way, that they might fry chicken or meat in the same deep fryer as the French fries, or the same thing in a milchika restaurant. You don't know. They might be cutting an onion with a milchika knife, making the onion milchik. Or if a fleishika restaurant is going to cut an onion with a meat knife, it's going to make the onion fleishik. So you have to be very careful. Generally speaking, the safe rule to assume is, unless you find out explicitly about this particular item that it's mamish completely pativ, you have to assume that whatever is in a milchika restaurant is dairy, whatever is in a meat restaurant is meat, and you have to act accordingly at the way you eat it, or don't with what you eat it, and so on and so forth. Now, in halacha, many times that people, okay, now let me go up to something else first. Now we know the halacha is, and this is the accepted halacha in the majority of the world, that between meat and milk, you need to wait 6 hours. Between milk and meat, there are different customs. One thing is for sure, though. Either way, let's say you wait an hour between dairy and meat. From dairy to meat, you have to, the custom based on the Zohar, that's what the Rabbi writes is our custom, we wait an hour. Many opinions say all you have to do is rinse your mouth, eat something, and you can right away go from dairy to meat. Some people wait a half an hour. Based on the Zohar, the din is you have to wait, the custom is to wait an hour. Waiting an hour is not enough. There's a few more criteria that need to be, even 6 hours is not enough between meat and milk. There's a few criteria that need to be kept. Number one, it has to be a bracha chreina afterwards. That means, to give you a simple example, Shavuos morning you make kiddush, you have cheesecake. And an hour later, you're going to have your meat meal. If you don't make an after bracha on the cheesecake, you're not allowed to eat the meat. It has to be a separate meal, meaning separate meal means you make an after bracha on the meat or the milk, whichever way you're going. Number two, you need to eat something and rinse your mouth before you eat the opposite. In other words, if you're eating milchiks and an hour later you want to eat fleishiks, you need to do a few things. You need to make an after bracha on what you ate. You need to rinse your mouth and you need to eat something. Then, after an hour, you can go eat meat. If you have a meat meal and you want to go eat dairy, so again, you have to make an after bracha on the meat. You have to wait 6 hours. You have to rinse your mouth and you have to eat something. That is when it's allowed to wait the 6 hours. Now, there's two reasons given in Halacha why you need to wait 6 hours between meat and milk. One reason is because that's how long it takes to digest meat in your stomach. Okay? And that's why hard cheeses, aged cheeses, you also have to wait 6 hours. But there's two reasons for it. One reason in Halacha is because it takes 6 hours to digest the food. So you don't want milchiks and fleishiks at the same time in your stomach. And the second reason is because things get stuck in between your teeth. When you eat meat, as everybody knows, a woman, the day she goes to mikveh, is not supposed to eat meat unless it's Shabbos. Why? Because meat gets stuck in your teeth. So what's going to be the problem? You're going to eat meat, and then later you're going to eat milchiks, and some meat will come out of your tooth and mix with the milchiks. Now, what's the difference? We'll just go this, and then we'll keep the rest for next week. What's the difference between these two halachas? So the difference is very simple. What happens, in years ago, they didn't have blenders. How did they blend food for babies? Don't laugh, but this is the way they used to do it. The mothers would chew the food in her mouth, or the father, and then after it was chewed up, they took it out of their mouth and they fed the baby. The baby couldn't chew. They didn't have blenders. So what they would do is actually chew the meat. They did not swallow it. They chewed it, and then they gave it to the baby to eat. So according to the reason that 6 hours digestion, you don't have to wait 6 hours because you didn't digest it. But the other reason is that it might get stuck in your teeth, so then you need to wait 6 hours because of that. Or the opposite. You drank something and you didn't chew it. You drank chicken soup. Okay? And you didn't chew it. So according to the reason of chewing, you don't have to wait anything. According to the reason of digestion, you have to wait 6 hours. And therefore, the din is we're machmir both ways. Under all circumstances, anytime you eat meat. Unless, if somebody, let's say, tastes a drop of, let's say you're cooking chicken soup, and you put just to taste it on your lip, and you don't swallow it, so then you don't have to wait 6 hours. You have to rinse your mouth and eat something, but you don't have to wait 6 hours because, number one, you didn't chew it, and number two, you didn't swallow it. Okay, we're going to go to Tanya, and